A lot of good content, a lot of opportunity for discussion. I want to start with some basic introductions for the folks behind putting the workshop together, and then we're going to go through the plan for the day, and then do introductions as a whole group and establish what our goals are for the workshop through the survey that some of you took. I think most of you did, actually, a good response rate, and the goals for the workshop organizers as well. So up front, so my name is Tyrone Reitman. I'm the former director of an organization called Healthy Democracy that I led that organization for about 10 years and helped develop the Citizens Initiative Review model of public deliberation. I'm now with a group called the Policy Jury Group, founding director. It's a new effort to kind of refine some of the work I did there. I'm going to turn over to Kyle Bozentko, ED of the Jefferson Center next.
Yeah, Kyle Bozentko, and I'm the executive director at the Jefferson Center. We do civic engagement and public policy using the citizens jury model. Our founder, Ned Crosby, pioneered the jury process in the mid-'70s and continued to refine it, and we're currently doing work to utilize that method and others. And I'll let my colleague introduce herself as well.
And I'm Camille Morse Nicholson, and I'm the program coordinator at the Jefferson Center, so I do our implementation of our programs.
Okay, and then David Schecter from New Democracy, and also the driving force behind the Democracy R&D network that's being established. David?
David Schecter. I'm the Associate Director of Research and Development at the New Democracy Foundation based in Sydney, Australia. We discover, develop, implement, and promote democratic alternatives, and the jury model, the basic idea of a randomly selected deliberative body of ordinary folks, is at the center of our work. And one of my projects is developing a network called Democracy R&D of other organizations doing similar work. The Jefferson Center is part of it. Policy Jury Group, Democracy in Practice. Adam Conkright will be speaking with you.
Thanks, David. And so for the workshop today, a lot of this was really geared around trying to set up a learning exchange between people who are interested in citizen juries, assemblies, sortition, like the whole body of work that falls under the broad umbrella of mini-publics generally, and practitioners of mini-publics. And this is really an effort to deepen our understanding of each other's work, have a learning exchange and gain knowledge from each other, and also have a really open dialogue. And part of the idea of having an open dialogue in this, this is being filmed for the benefit of the Democracy R&D network, so folks that are going to be here today are able to review the discussion, is really to have a safe space to kind of share our ideas and learnings and discuss challenges and opportunities and critiques. And part of that is going to rely on everybody participating, and even though we're going to give some standard presentations to share our understanding and to kick off conversations, is really about this whole group having a discussion together. Recognizing, I think, that there's no one right way for any of this work. Even though citizen juries and assemblies and sortition models, contemporary ones, have been around now for some time, in a lot of ways this work is still very much in its kind of growth stage as we refine and learn and have success and progress with all of these different efforts. Before we get into introductions, I want to review the agenda real quick just to make sure everybody is clear on what we're aiming to do. We're starting obviously a little bit late as well. We're in a room where we're going to have people trickling in and out, and we're going to be interrupted a fair bit. Citizen jury training? You're in the right spot. And because the food is in the back of the room, there are going to be people passing back and forth.
There is access to that room from the hallway. I don't know if you want to ask.
Yeah, that would be great. Would you mind checking? Yeah. Thank you. So with the agenda, the idea is to spend a chunk of time this morning setting the context for deliberative mini-publics in general. David is going to lead that with the assistance of Sylvia and Adam. We're going to take a break after watching a video on the Irish Constitutional Convention after having some discussion about kind of background and context. After that break, we're going to get into a discussion about design fundamentals and design considerations for citizen juries in particular that Camille and Kyle are going to lead. And we'll run that out until we hit lunch. During lunch, we'll have an opportunity, if we want to continue talking, there's a beautiful little courtyard behind us. We can grab lunch and chit-chat back there. People are free to do what they want. After lunch, I'll lead a discussion about opportunities and challenges for citizen juries, in particular, looking at the Citizens Initiative Review example and what that work took and some of the complications and opportunities that came out of it. And at the end of that session, we'll look back at our goals for the day, which we'll discuss here in just a minute, and see if each of you feel like we've reached our goals for running a workshop that has had some benefit to you and for your attendance. We'll also be doing that to take a look at what we want to do with any remaining time at the end of the day, if we want to break out into sessions or cover topics that haven't yet been addressed. So that's roughly our, great. That's roughly the lay of the land for the day. We talked a bit about goals at the outset, the organizers of this workshop, and the three main ones that we had were essentially setting up a learning exchange, which is both among practitioners and academics and folks interested in this work as a whole, to deepen our understanding of both process and design and kind of challenges and opportunities with deliberative mini-publics. And then really to foster an open dialogue and have hopefully what will be a fun discussion over the course of the day with you all. So before we get into introductions, which we're going to do in just a minute, I wanted to share, a number of you took a survey before this, and thank you for those of you that did. We took that into consideration when setting up this workshop, but I wanted to review some of the goals in addition to the three I just mentioned that came out of that survey. Because we asked you, what do you most want to get out of the Democracy R&D Network workshop? And some of the responses were, along with gaining practical insights, folks want to understand more about the Democracy R&D Network and how it works and what its goals are. A better sense of current practices, information that can be taken back and used in academic settings, learning from challenges and opportunities and having a real grounded discussion around those. Learning more about tested deliberative procedures and how to get involved in deliberative mini-publics. And learning about the distinctions between these methods as well, which I know there are many, many different approaches to this work, but getting a better understanding of those distinctions between a citizen jury and an assembly and so on. And then a number of folks chimed in saying they'd like to learn about the possibilities and pros and cons of trying to institutionalize deliberative mini-publics in government. We also asked what some of the key questions are that you wanted to see addressed. And I think we're going to cover all of these over the course of the agenda we have, but if questions pop up that aren't addressed, that's what we're going to have the end of the day for to discuss. And obviously a whole bunch of Q&A, so I'm guessing we'll get through all the questions before the end of the day. One of the questions is how we frame these ideas in a way that makes them more understandable, more salient, and can be proposed in a manner that people will want to take them on. A general question of why these programs haven't taken off to their full potential yet. There's a lot of interest in discussing what some of the challenges have been. A related question. A lot of questions too around how to evaluate deliberative mini-publics. Like, how do you evaluate both the quality of the deliberative setting itself and how do you evaluate the impact? And then lessons that can be learned from efforts abroad outside of the U.S., looking at Europe and Australia and South America, where there's work taking place as well. So with that, I wanted to spend a couple minutes allowing you all to introduce yourselves, and if we could just spend a minute or two each, what we'd like to cover is just to get a sense of who you are, your background, where you came from to attend this conference, and what you hope to gain by attending. Pass it to the line.
Cool, thanks.
Yep.
I'm Sasha Fisher. I run an organization called Spark Microgrants. We support governments and civil society organizations across sub-Saharan Africa to develop inclusive local democratic processes. Right now we're focused on Uganda, Rwanda, and Burundi So one of our largest programs is working with the Rwandan government on their decentralization strategy. How do they actually effectively run inclusive community meetings, not just have a handful of local elite men dominating the room, which seems to be happening around the world. I live in New York. I grew up there, spent a few years living in Rwanda, but we now have country teams that are run by folks in the region and growing them over there. And we're thinking about bringing it back to the US actually and doing some similar work here. So I'm excited about this. I don't know as much in the democracy space. It gets to be a bit of a touchy word internationally, so we don't always use it, but looking forward to learning more of the language that you guys are using in these fields and the processes. Thanks.
Thanks for being here.
I'm Alexander Kolokotronis. I'm a PhD student at Yale. I'm originally from New York. In New York, I founded a student group that has pushed for and implemented various participatory budgeting processes at City University of New York. And we've been interested in looking at other things that we could advocate for and implement. And so this is one reason why I came. Another reason I'm here is through my time in my labor union at Yale. There's been a lot of questions around union democracy. And for a period, some people were throwing around ideas of some kind of citizen jury type setup. And so I've been more interested in just getting more information on that. My research is also focused on participatory democracy, so there's a recent thing as well.
Thanks.
Cool.
I'm Adam Cronkrite. I'm coming in today from Syracuse, New York. I've been living in South America, Bolivia, for the last 5 years. We have a small nonprofit that has been working in schools to try and reinvent civic education, leadership development, mostly around using voluntary lotteries instead of student elections to form student councils, and rotation and some other elements that I'm sure we'll have more time to discuss. And in transition back to the States, and really excited to learn more from you all with regard to citizen assemblies and juries.
Thanks, Adam.
Cool. I'm Cassie Hemphill. I'm from Missoula, Montana. I wear 2 hats. I teach part-time at the 2-year college within the University of Montana and occasionally on the 4-year campus as well. And my teaching focuses on communication, and I just introduced a new Gen Ed required course in deliberative democracy, which is like, yes, get them early, right? And then, but most of my time I spend working for IAP2 Federation. I'm the professional development manager, so I manage the training, the courses that we deliver around the globe, and we've delivered them now on every continent except Antarctica.
Well,
yeah, so.
Thanks, guys.
Hello, my name is Khaldun, Khaldun. I'm a citizen engagement and democratic development professional. I worked with the International Republican Institute since 2011 in Jordan, Middle East, to support citizen engagement and local governance. I'm here to learn about many things from you and hope everything will be fine.
Thank you.
And I'm Camille Morse, Nicholson, the program coordinator at the Jefferson Center, and I'm excited to hear a bit more about the CIR from you, Ty, and have an opportunity to sort of look at deliberative democracy from a perspective of someone who is not embedded necessarily within it, but is interested.
So Camille, can we ask how you came to the Jefferson Center? I mean, what's your background? Because you just said that this is not your area of expertise that you came in with?
So I studied political science in college, but I've been with the Jefferson Center for 2.5 years, and I rarely have an opportunity to interact with people who are like interested and engaged in the topic, but aren't embedded within the field. So that's exciting for me.
Cool. Kyle Bozentko once again. I've been with the Jefferson Center since 2011. Prior to that, I worked in political and campaign organizing, primarily at state level for state house races, typically. Grew up in South Dakota, then moved to Minnesota to do that. And so that is some of the perspective that we have brought to the work of how to try to more effectively incorporate deliberative practices within some broader strategies outside of just direct policy making or decision making. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you all your experiences in different areas, because kind of continually on the lookout for how and where we might be able to utilize these practices elsewhere.
I'm David Schecter. I'm with the New Democracy Foundation, which is based in Sydney, Australia. I am American. I live in San Francisco. New Democracy has had a lot of success in figuring out what are the situations where convening many publics and taking their recommendations very seriously can actually solve problems for elected officials. By doing that, we have had many publics take on some very big and some very tough issues and a very high rate of implementation of what they recommended, including entire city budgets, long-term capital plans, policy about should the state of I'm blanking on the state now, South Australia, sorry, accept the world's nuclear waste, and one case, should the city of Greater Geelong, how would you want to change your basic form of local government, the powers of the mayor, the powers of the council, all those things. The main thing, I am continuing to work on improvements in processes and new and including how to combine self-selected participation, as you typically see in participatory budgeting and so forth, with randomly selected participation, as in many publics. Hopefully we're going to have a chance to actually implement some of this in the city of Madrid pretty soon. We've just started working on that project. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good to have you. And probably the thing I'm spending most time on is organizing a new network with 19 organizations that are doing this kind of work, on-the-ground work with many publics in 13 countries. Three purposes. One, to help each organization be a lot more successful than we could be by ourselves. Two, to enable collaborative projects that we just could not take on separately. And three, to make a much greater collective difference in improving democracy. We are new. We only had our first meeting in Madrid in mid-January. We've been talking and communicating for about 6 months, but we have have a proposal in it and are doing outreach for a project called Our Parliament to try and get parliaments in different countries to convene many publics to address basic questions of how would you want to improve your form of democracy and increase trust in Parliament? What would it take? And we've got a strong letter of support from the President of Portugal for implementing it in Portugal. We've made some progress at outreach to the officials in the European Union. One of our members, Participatory, is an organization founded by people who used to run public engagement for the European Union. That's one project. Another was we did a collaborative submission with about 3 of the organizations for a proposal to improve global governance, especially like a new mini-public citizen body that would be an add-on to the United Nations, submitted to a competition by the Global Challenges Foundation in Sweden. And New Democracy and our Spanish partner Participa Lab are working on a proposal to combine self-selected proposals and an electronic platform that they already have in a mini-public in the city of Madrid.
Thanks, David. Sylvia?
My name is Silvia Cervellini. I'm from Brazil, and my background is in public opinion and market research for 30 years. I was in one of the major firms of surveys in Brazil and Latin America. And 2 years ago, I left my corporate life and started this civic plan action. I learned about mini-publics in a course in political science department at the University of São Paulo, and I was enchanted with the mini-publics ideas. And so I invited a few friends. We are 11 people from different areas, prior colleagues and partners, to found Delibera Brazil, a non-profit organization who is starting to disseminate mini publics in Brazil. We want to use, and I'm here. Fortunately, I'm very glad to learn, to exchange experiences, and try to contribute with my prior life with all this challenge that we have.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Thank you.
So, Tyrone Reitman, I'm the founding director of a new organization called the Policy Jury Group, which is not even a year old, which is really founded around the idea of making citizen jury related work as accessible as possible and as open as possible. And so what we hope to have is a suite of documents in about 4 months that are all copyright free and open and shared and distributed. Prior to that, I spent about 10 years working on Healthy Democracy, which is an organization I co-founded, which I'll spend more time on this afternoon, and helped to develop the Citizens Initiative Review Program and design it and through multiple iterations to get it passed into law. And the reason I was interested in that work was because my prior work, similar to Kyle's, working on political campaigns and really, honestly, just getting pretty disgusted with how political campaigns are run and wanting to do something about it. And my effort was the CIR. So I'll spend more time on those topics a little later this afternoon. Joseph, if you want to introduce yourself?
It's really Joe.
Joe, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Call me Joe, but
we got a Joe.
So I'm stuck with the name tag. I'm Joe Moore. I'm serve on the Chicago City Council, and I was the first elected official in the United States to implement a participatory budgeting process. I did it in my ward, the 49th ward of Chicago, which is on Chicago's far north side, one of the most diverse communities in the entire nation. I liken it to either a mini Brooklyn, or I call Brooklyn Rogers Park on steroids.
And what do you hope to gain by being at this workshop?
Well, I want to see what we can do to expand democratic, with a small d, participation beyond just participatory budgeting. So, looking forward to hearing any new ideas and innovative ways to do it. While at the same time making sure that whatever process put in place is done in a way that is thoughtful and deliberative. I think that's an important part. And I always thought that's what was great about participatory budgeting, is that the process we employed allows for that. So it's not just a referendum vote up and down, but there's a lot of deliberation that goes inside it.
Great, thanks for being here.
I apologize for being late.
So we might have one or more folks joining us still who haven't shown up yet, so just heads up. Okay, so I am going to turn it over to David at this point to provide kind of a context overview for background of deliberative mini-publics, and after that we're going to hear from Adam and from Sylvia to share a little more about their work, and then we'll take it from there. David,
okay. Yeah, before I do that, before I forget, Alexander? Oh. Adam has a colleague whose name is Simon Peck, who is working on many publics in union democracy. Definitely somebody you'd want to talk to. So talk to Adam.
Would you share it with me too? I'm faculty union, and we're right in the middle of negotiations right now.
Yeah. Introduce yourself, please.
Yes, please, please. And yeah, and
sorry.
Oh, and Sasha, I have a colleague, who's a university scholar in Dilla, Ethiopia, who's working on has been adapting the traditional system of the Oromo people of Ethiopia called Gadat, which is highly deliberative, amazingly deliberative, been around since the 1400s. May have some clues for some of your work. I'd be glad to connect you.
Thanks.
Let's see. We have a new person here.
Yep, so Patsy.
I'm sorry I'm late. I'm Patsy Krager. I'm staying with friends. I used to live here, and I misguessed the traffic. So it took 30 minutes because there was an accident on the freeway. It took me an hour and 25 minutes.
Your timing is still pretty good because we just finished introduction.
So we know you, and you don't know us.
Right, so I just decided to be calm about all of it.
Good.
Good for you.
So, I apologize for being late.
So,
am I supposed to say anything?
if you could just share
You make me look better because I was just
Okay, I'm glad I made you look better.
a little bit about your background, where you were from, and what your expectations are for this workshop.
Okay, great. Well, I've made Joseph look better, so I'm happy to have done that. Joe, sorry. So I'm originally from the East Coast, but I'm an assistant professor at Georgia Southern, and my background is I was a lawyer for 18 years, and then I went back here in Phoenix, and then I went back to school at ASU, and I have a master's in nonprofit and a PhD in public administration and policy. And I'm working on a book. I'm under contract with Routledge on philanthropy and policymaking, and looking at participatory practices and how foundations engage with community before they make decisions. Yeah, I worked at the governor's office in Arizona, in the governor's office of Children, Youth, and Family with the AmeriCorps funding while I was in school, and so I worked with a lot of foundations, and that's how I was interested. So I'm here to learn about tools and techniques that I can use to build foundations if they engage in citizen juries and such. So I'm just here to learn.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so thank you.
Okay, and back to Dave.
Yeah. Oh, Patsy, the Portuguese partner in Democracy R&D, an organization called Fórum dos Cidadãos, Forum of the Citizens in Lisbon. One of the people there, Manuel Arriaga, wrote a little concept paper about using many publics to advise philanthropy. And he's like half the year in Lisbon and half the year in New York City, in New York at Stern University. I can connect you.
That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, yeah, remind me afterwards because I don't have a note to remember.
Okay. Have a good night.
All right.
Tyrone, if I could interrupt just a second. You know, I'm sensing that there's going to be lots of, hey, I know of this paper or that paper. I know the conference organizers have created some Google Docs for collaboration. Could we have one for this as well? Because we're not going to be able to keep up with all these ideas. And
so we have that ready to go. I guess the only reason we haven't shared it yet, so everything that's in your packet is already available, and links and all those things. We just wanted to wait to make sure everyone was comfortable sharing contact information. Because when we do the Google Drive share, typically you'll see other people's info. So as long as no one objects to that, well, we can share that right away and have that ready. And then we can just create a document on there as well. Feel free to upload your own or anything like that. So yeah, we just wanted to wait.
Yeah, and if we can try to keep track of these references.
we'll remind you, don't worry.
All right. Well, I'm going to take about 10 minutes to give you some background for this session. I'm going to cover 3 topics. First, concepts. I want to clarify some terminology about citizens' juries, citizens' assemblies, mini-publics, sortition, and explain 3 basic ideas behind this approach to democracy: random selection, deliberation, and consensus. Second, examples. I will introduce some interesting examples of many publics in practice in a number of countries. Third, proposals. I will give you an overview of some bold proposals to make many publics part of democracy on an ongoing basis. I'd like to start by clarifying some terms that can be confusing. Citizens' juries and citizens' assemblies, along with deliberative polls, planning cells, consensus conferences, are varieties of an unusual and promising kind of political body. The term that I find most useful is mini-public, a randomly selected sample of the public that deliberates about a public decision or a category of decisions. What's different about a mini-public compared to other political bodies? There are 3 big differences: how participants are selected, the kind of conversation they have, and how they make decisions. About selection, the usual way to select decision makers are election and appointment. The usual way to select participants for public engagement is self-selection. Many publics are chosen through random selection, also known as selection by lot, or lottery, or sortition. What value can random selection add to democracy that these other methods don't have? Randomly selected bodies can be more representative of the public. It is easier for them to work together to solve a problem rather than to try to defeat each other at all costs. Most importantly, they are much harder to manipulate. The most common kind of political conversation is debate, where people come in with their minds made up and try their best to convince people that their idea is right and other people's ideas are wrong. In contrast, many publics engage in deliberation. They come to the conversation with open minds, listen to each other, and try to find a solution that they can all support. Decision making. The most common decision rules are majority vote and supermajority. Many publics sometimes use voting, but they usually try to decide by consensus. Let's find a solution that can work for all of us. Before I go any further, I don't believe that many publics should be used for everything, but I do believe that if we want to improve democracy, we need to add many publics to the designer's toolkit. Now I would like to give you a few examples of many publics in practice. In Australia, a 43-person mini public developed recommendations for the entire budget of the city of Melbourne, somewhere between 3 and 4 million people. And another mini public developed a 10-year, $5 billion capital plan for the city. In both cases, most of the recommendations have been implemented. A few years ago, Ireland held a constitutional convention with 33 members of parliament and 66 randomly selected Irish citizens. This convention created the ballot initiative that resulted in legalizing same-sex marriage in Ireland. I spoke to the chief academic advisor to the convention when he was in San Francisco, and he told me it never would have happened if it had been just the politicians.
Yeah.
After that, Ireland held a citizen assembly on the even more controversial issue of abortion. And the Irish government now has a special unit that is in charge of convening future citizens' assemblies. You will see a video about the Irish experience later this morning. For years, Denmark had a national law that required a mini public deliberation called a consensus conference on all major policy issues about science and technology. The consensus conferences were created by our Danish partner, the Danish Board of Technology Foundation. The city of Vorarlberg in Austria convenes a mini-public every year to advise the government about the state of the city and what big actions are needed to change things. The province of Luxembourg in Belgium has created a multi-year citizens' climate parliament that works with the legislature on all issues related to climate change. In Toronto, our Canadian partner, Mass LBP, helped the city set up the Toronto Planning Review Panel, an ongoing mini-public with 2-year terms of service that advises the planning department on their most important and contentious decisions. In France, the poorest outer suburbs of Paris have what they call conseils citoyens, randomly selected citizen councils that represent the voice of their communities to government across issues. This was an initiative of our French partner, Mission Publique, based in Paris. Many publics have been used to address constitutional issues in Canada, the Netherlands, Iceland, and Estonia. Mongolia recently passed a law that requires a mini-public deliberation every time they have an amendment to their constitution. Now I want to tell you about some proposals to incorporate mini-publics into government on an ongoing basis. I'll start with lawmaking. There are multiple articles and books that propose replacing one elected chamber of a legislature with a randomly selected chamber. And there have been serious conversations about, in particular, the House of Lords in the UK, the Senate in Australia, Canada, and Belgium. My colleague Terry Bericius, a former state assembly member in Vermont, has proposed a different approach, using multiple mini-publics with limited powers to set agendas, review proposals, and decide. And Alex Guerrero at the University of Pennsylvania has proposed creating separate mini-publics for different categories of issues with other mini-publics to coordinate between them. In terms of the executive branch, Terry Bericius and I have proposed replacing the elected policymaking chief executive with a public administrator who is hired by one mini-public, overseen by another one, and, if necessary, removed by a one-time jury. My colleague Lynn Carson at the New Democracy Foundation has proposed random selection of boards and commissions, starting with a pool of nominees. These people would not be representative of the public in the way a mini-public usually is, but they would be free from the any obligations to the people who appointed them and the pressure to be loyal. Australia has had several successful experiences with mini-publics developing entire city budgets. I have written a short paper that proposes doing mini-public budgeting on an ongoing basis, and I'm working on another one about mini-publics in city and regional planning, also based on experience in Australia. Brian Sullivan and I wrote a short piece about using self-selected teams open to anyone to develop proposals, a mini-public to review the proposals and select the most promising ones, and a separate mini-public to make the final decision. The New Democracy Foundation and our Spanish partner, Participalab in Madrid, are working on a customized version of this design for the City of Madrid government to implement. Just began conversations last week. Now, I don't think that random selection should be the only selection method, but I don't think we can solve the problems of democracy without it. I don't think deliberation should be the only kind of public policy conversation. There's room for debate, but I don't think we can solve the problems of democracy without deliberation. I also don't think consensus should be the only way to make decisions, but I don't think we can solve the problems of democracy without it. Now, when we go into the Q&A, I'm going to want to pose 3 questions to you folks. 1, when you think about mini-publics, what are you enthusiastic about? 2, what are your doubts and concerns? 3, how could you imagine incorporating mini-publics into democracy on an ongoing basis? But before we get to the Q&A, we're going to hear from 2 colleagues who have been doing some great on-the-ground work. Adam Concrite with Democracy in Practice, and then Silvia Cervellini with Deliberative Brazil in São Paulo. Adam, are you ready?
Sure, yeah. So my name is Adam Concrite, and I've been working with a nonprofit that I co-founded called Democracy in Practice, and we're in our 5th year of trying to reinvent civic education and leadership development in schools by reinventing student government. And so the main changes that we have proposed and helped make in these schools have been changing, moving away from student elections, which tend to be a glorified popularity contest in these schools, towards voluntary lotteries. And that has been a big change for particularly students who are less charismatic, less popular, new in school, who would virtually never even run as a candidate, let alone have a chance of winning. And it has made the student governments in these schools much more diverse and much more representative of the school population. We've also changed, we've moved away from these full-year terms of office, which are really common in student governments all around the world, to 3-month and 4-month rotation to get more students involved. And we have also experimented with horizontal team structures to get away from the traditional president, vice president, and such. It's a bit of a unique context to work in, not only because it's an educational context, but also these student councils or student governments also have to execute their projects and their initiatives, and so it's a little different than, say, just consulting on policy issues. And so it's a mix of facilitating their own meetings and project execution and such. And well, I'm going to be talking a lot more about that on Saturday at 10 o'clock in a panel called Reinventing Civics. And it is a bit tangential to this talk today, but we do have a lot of experience with young people and lotteries. And I'm currently transitioning back to the States. I'm still involved with Democracy in Practice, but now I'm looking to take aim at using local governments as a place to experiment with randomly selected legislative bodies, so city councils and the like. And I'm really interested in citizens' ballot initiatives in cities and eventually some states where that is a viable option as a way to potentially redesign local governments, usurping some of the elected officials that may not be super excited about losing their position. And so I'm just getting started on that and really interested to learn a lot more about y'all's experience with citizens' juries and citizens' assemblies, and to think about where things could go.
Well, I don't know, but you probably have heard about all the problems that we have in politics in Brazil, and as in other countries, democracy is in a big turmoil there. And in the latest years, a lot of innovation in politics have young people mostly have tried to make a lot of innovations, and we had for the last 2 years, that's a kind of thing that you may want to take a look, an event called Virada Política, and where they assemble more than 100 initiatives, kinds of political education, technological platforms, and Delibera Brazil has participated. So just to tell you that we have a lot of initiatives to create and reinforce democracy and enlarge citizen participation. But and in the middle of this climate, we founded Delibera Brazil. We created Delibera Brazil last year, and based on these mini publics ideas that David have just told us, these concepts of deliberation, the non-biased or less biased, at least, participation, so how to minimize the self-selection bias in participation, and the deliberative and the informative phase that is very important. How can we decide? How can citizens decide with a lot of thinking and deepening in the complex problems that we have faced in Brazil and every political places. So we have started last year, and we have conducted a pilot in a small city of the Northeast, state of Bahia. The city is called Ilhéus, and we were with an NGO called Instituto Nós Ilhéus, local NGO, and they wanted to contribute with the mobile week, a week related to all the problems with traffic and transportation in the city. And so they thought that a mini public would be really helpful to contribute with the regulation of mototaxi. Mototaxi is a kind of transport, and it's informal, because the cities didn't have a legislation on it. So it was informal but a chaotic activity, and the city wanted to regulate, but it's very polemic, I don't know. So we ran a pilot there, a mini public, together with Instituto Nós Ilhéus in September, and we had and we tried to put together not a random, but we used quotas. We used quotas of gender, age, education level, because education is really related with income and social status, economic status, and also quotas on usage of this kind of transportation and other kinds of transportations. So we did two sessions. The first day was more informative. We gave orientation on deliberative procedures, like you don't say anything that the other could think of and think about it and don't refuse immediately. You always say something respectful. You'll never. So we gave these deliberative procedures, and then we gave them information on legislation in other cities, the federal laws that are ruling over this kind of activity, and other kinds of urbanization problems that the city has. And in the second day, they deliberated over these issues on the legislation, and they put together a document that the Instituto Nós Ilhéus gave to the mayor and to the city legislative. So they are using that to make the law, the Ilhéus regulation. And that was our pilot, and we are looking now for new opportunities and new partners to conduct other mini publics in Brazil. And we wanted to do something a pilot on a subject that there was a collective choice, a collective decision to make, like with a referendum, or at least with some kind of poll that we could do before, and then run the mini public and make exposition of these results, and then run a second poll just to know the impact on like a proxy, a mini public like a proxy of political information for the general public, as the Citizen Initiative Review has that. So we are looking for opportunities, and that's it.
Could I just add one thing? Sorry, my mind is half in the video recording of the session. But people might be wondering, I'm not sure if I even mentioned where we were working in schools, and people might be wondering, the agenda talks about mini publics in Brazil and Bolivia. We've been in Bolivia working, another co-founder is Bolivian, and so we've been working in schools there, although I grew up and went to public school in New York, and it's the same, student government's the same thing all around the world and has the same limitations and problems and the same type of exclusion that goes on. And so we've developed a lot of tools and stuff to share guides and videos of the students explaining how they do the lotteries and such. And like I said, I'll go into that more on Saturday, and also we can talk about that on the side and stuff. But I just wanted to clarify, that's what we've been working, that's how that connects to the agenda there. And also we have on our website, if you just search Democracy in Practice, we also have a website in Spanish, Democracia en Práctica, but we have lots of videos there. You can see students participating in lotteries, and they tend to have a lot of fun with that. So.
Oh, I just I wanted to say that in Ilhéus we had these videos, but they were part of the city hall equipment. So they were not moving towards the who was speaking. But if you want to take a look, they are at the YouTube at the Nós Ilhéus YouTube, so you can look for mini public in Nós Ilhéus, so you can see the citizens talking.
Nós Ilhéus?
Nossa Ilhéus, our Ilhéus.
Is that a link that we can have added to the?
Yes.
Yeah. Nossa Ilheus.
US?
Yeah.
So what we wanted to do first is see if there's any questions that people have right off the bat. from what you've heard so far, anything, clarification, coming at this from different kind of levels of experience with this stuff. If there's anything that you want clarified, to explain in more detail from anyone who's shared so far, before we move on to a case study or an example of one of these that was mentioned, the Irish Constitutional Convention. So anything, any immediate questions that pop up for people? Yeah, so
thanks. I've loved hearing about both of these models, and thanks for the introduction there. That when folks get randomly selected and placed on the mini-public committee or whatever it becomes, how do they, is there any standard way or thought-through way to get them up to speed on what to do once they're on there?
I mean, the training.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks.
So, I mean, there's a lot of different approaches, and it depends.
Yeah.
So, what I think we'll try to tackle a little bit about some of the choices that go into that right after our break. Our next session is going to be on design choices, ranging from difference between kind of a randomly selected lottery approach versus a random recruitment method that brings quotas and other things, through how information is presented, and then decision-making processes as well. So we'll try to touch on that a little bit, and then see if that covers that question.
Cool. Thanks.
And I would, to add to that, there isn't a standard way. People do it different ways in different countries, but everybody I know who does this work puts a lot of time and effort and thought into how to do that. Otherwise, it doesn't work.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, go for it.
No, I was just thinking when you were talking about the mini publics and moving decision making. Here in Arizona, they have something, the Arizona Town Hall, and it initially started to inform policymakers on points of view. And about 15 years ago, they gave up. And so they actually have town halls on issues, and they have proceedings, and it's deliberative with a consensus. But they've decided it's just for the sake of having the exercise in deliberative democracy, not with the goal to influence policymakers, which I think, I shouldn't say this, but that seems to be a failure. Yeah. You know, why go through all of that? And so when you mentioned about that, you know, it just made me think of that, because and it's not random, it's elites who attend, and it's very expensive. And the person who's the director has tried to bring in youth voices, but they don't have scholarshiping money, so it's very expensive, and it's only elites from the state, and it's really, you know, it's a nice 3 days that doesn't make a difference in the policy arena. So
that's the actual, sorry, to clarify, the actual mini public was dominated by elites.
It is real. It was started for elites, and now it's continued to be elites.
So the selection of it was? There's
no random selection.
Okay.
And I think it's really based on who can afford and whose voice the belief is that matters on these issues. But even though they're still there, the process is not used for your process. It's just now as an exercise in deliberative democracy.
Yeah, if it's not representative, not randomly selected, not representative, basically it's not a mini public. It's something else. That's one of the basic features.
Right, and that's so it's sort of it's anti-democratic. So I just had thought when you all were speaking, it made me just think about, you know, this process and who those folks were, and you know, not to badmouth them, but that it's really not capturing the community voice.
So, I have a question. So, you know, I'm familiar with many of these case studies, sort of on a very limited basis, and it's really hard to find information that's available about all these different initiatives. And I would just make a comment that all of you that are doing this work, videos, captioned videos especially, are just a gold mine of information. They provide so much richness and understanding, especially for students who are encountering this for the first time. But my question really has to go to the catalyst or the champion. So, you know, for instance, Joe, I mean, obviously you were a champion of this idea. Somehow you heard about this and you said, let's do it. for these other initiatives, and I'm a little familiar with yours because I've seen some of the videos and it's marvelous work, right? So generally speaking, when we think of innovation in policy, there is an internal person who acts as that catalyst or the champion for the policy to get that momentum going internally in an agency or a government. So what I'm leading up to here is, so David, especially with some of these initiatives you've talked about, and I know Australia has done a lot, and then you've mentioned a whole bunch of other ones, where was that catalyst? Who was that person? Because that's who we need to target in our own communities to get this sort of initiative going.
I guess that you could say, you might think of two kinds of catalysts. There are people with the ideas, and there are people who are ready, willing, and able to implement. There's like the Josh Lerners from the Participatory Budgeting Project, and like the Joe Moores in office at the 49th Ward of Chicago. So in New Democracy's case, our executive director, Ian Walker, has done a real good job of, first we have some very feasible ideas. Actually, first he started out by doing research on what problems do elected officials have, as well as does the public have, that convening many publics could solve, so it's a win for everybody. And then second, looking around all over the place for where are the jurisdictions where those problems exist, who are the people who seem to have unusual willingness and interest to do something new, to take on the problems. So you do that search, and after a while you come up with people. It's kind of like Josh Lerner, I believe, had a conference that you attended, isn't that how?
We were introduced by a mutual acquaintance who was familiar with my work and just my general approach to things, and became aware of what Josh was trying to do. So I first heard about participatory budgeting attending a conference about the U.S. Social Forum in Atlanta in 2007. And but in order to go from, that's kind of an interesting, intriguing idea that'd be kind of cool to do, to actually providing the resources to do it, that's where I was introduced to Josh. And 2 years later, I was introduced to him, and I said, yeah, let's do it. But I only did it because he was willing to come to the table to provide the technical assistance we needed to, and his knowledge of how it worked in other countries to allow us to make it actually work in my ward.
So I would summarize three things, basically. Number one, get a good understanding of not only the problems that the public faces, but also the problems that elected officials and other decision makers face. Could be like the head of the planning department or something. Two, have some pretty feasible solutions, a good outline ready. And then three, go around and look in as many places as possible for jurisdictions and champions.
Yeah, absolutely. So
there's lots of Joe Moores out there.
There are, and so I'm really seeing, if I could just, there's not that many, yes. You're rather unique and special.
There are a few of us, but it takes a lot of convincing.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that if we drew this out as a model, we would see that there's this one element that has the technical knowledge and the ability to provide the assistance and educate people on how the process. And then we have people like Joe that have an established need, and somehow we just need to link those two together. Is that?
That's a big part of it, yeah.
Okay.
Well, and I think there's an added element that's presenting what you're aiming to accomplish in terms that are accessible and relevant to a policymaker or anyone else, and targeting that to, it may on one hand be elected officials, but also there's a whole kind of suite or batch of problems that convening and doing this around issues of community concern can be the catalyst for elected officials or agency officials to identify and recognize the value. And so I think there's a kind of push and pull or a tension between, and there are examples that we can look at of where formal government involvement may not necessarily be a positive thing or viewed as a positive thing for certain problems as well. And so that's an element, and especially when it comes to things like sponsorship and others, there are ways to circumvent or develop legitimacy that may not exist actually with elected officials or governments as well. And so that's a key part of kind of how you develop what you're trying to accomplish, with whom and for whom, I think are the ways to think about it from our perspective.
And I'd add, and I agree with all that. And I'd add a piece to it too in terms of combining the technical expertise with like the Joe Moores of the world, which is really around the necessity of political inertness. And the sense that you have to, I mean, this is just coming from the CIR experience, like a big part of my job for the first 5-6 years was lobbying. And so it was figuring out like, how do you lobby for good ideas in a way where you still have legitimacy across the aisle and don't fall into a lot of the pitfalls that a lot of advocacy organizations do. And I'll talk a bit about that this afternoon, but it's one of those pieces I think gets overlooked a bit in terms of direct advocacy and how you make that linkage between the Josh Lerners and the Joe Moores, for example.
So what you then are also implying, is there a certain neutrality that is required for that linkage?
Yes. I believe it's necessary.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. New Democracy has two retired national politicians on our board. One is from the left party and the other's from the right party. And we don't do any major initiative without seeking support from both sides. We never take a position on any policy issue. We never take a position on any candidate or party.
That's my research interests, but if we go a step further then to philanthropy, and we have folks like the Gates Foundation driving health, charter school education, and there's no accountability to the governed. And so when the criticism there is to their legitimacy or accountability, why isn't philanthropy then organizing many publics in their community to really have a stake in the game?
Because they haven't heard of them yet.
Right, but I'm here to learn from you to, hopefully advise them. Yeah, but I mean, it's frightening really because their accountability is to a board of directors to drive an initiative, and many people don't know the level of partnership with government really driving policy issues that are keeping out, what today is about. I mean, community voice.
By the way, the word foundation is confusing. Australian language is different. It sounds like, from an American perspective, like we're in philanthropy. We're not. We're an NGO.
Right. In America, they have private. Their NGOs are nonprofits.
Yeah, we're a nonprofit.
Right, and they're private philanthropic foundations.
Yeah,
so
right.
I should say that. Yes, sorry about that.
Yeah, that's why I think Manuel's idea about many publics and philanthropy is really interesting.
Right.
It also, if I could bring it back to Sasha, the work that you do, there's also this risk in these of, reinforcing these sort of perceptions of colonialism, right? And that would be one of the really tricky things that you would have to navigate through, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a lot. I mean, I could get to that, but I think I'm curious the policy comment that you were making, that this is not related to policy, that you don't take policy stances, because it feels like at this moment in thinking about how democracies are formed, we actually do need policies that change the infrastructure, the institutions of our democracy. So I'm curious how you guys don't want to have policy or back policies that actually do improve the institution of our democracy.
Okay.
And then I just want to make a point that I really appreciate the philanthropic piece that you're bringing up. We've organized a group of foundations to talk about why is it so prescriptive, right? But I mean, philanthropy you go through this stage with with donors where it's like you just want to build stuff, and then they're like, oh, building stuff doesn't always work because community members aren't engaged, and they're like, oh, we should do participatory building the stuff, you know, and we haven't quite gotten to the phase where it's like, oh, let's actually decentralize that. Right. But it's a power issue, right? We all want to have, that's like whether it's leaders in government or it's leaders in philanthropy, they want to control the outcomes. And it's scary to folks to be able to decentralize that. But I think hopefully there's like a movement that's building.
There are shifts, and there are several movements and large private foundations doing it. I've developed a model, but I don't have
I want
the
to learn
tools
about
to ask the questions, so that's what,
Just a very quick clarification. We do advocate for change in democracy itself. In the decision-making process, we don't advocate for a pro and con or anything on any particular decision. So if it's like the South Australia and nuclear, we're not advocating pro, anti-nuclear, anything like that. We are advocating, let's change the way this decision is made.
So it's very much like any neutral facilitation exercise where the interest, or what we do in public participation, we're interested in the process. What the outcome is up to the mini public, right?
Absolutely.
We're simply
to get
focused
the
on
process happening and
processes.
persisting, you have to embed it in some way in the
Yes.
institution.
Yeah.
There has
Yes,
to be a
that's right.
decision
And those are
made to
policies.
do
That's
that,
right.
and that's a policy,
Yes,
right?
yes.
So it is. I'm just talking.
I
like
don't think of that as policy, sorry.
Yeah.
issue agnostic.
A meta policy.
But it is, yeah.
Well, not a substantive issue.
I like that, issue agnostic. That's a great term. Thank you.
You know what? Yeah, I don't know if it's not the right time to debate it, but I've been asking myself that question, like, how do you? It sounds issue agnostic, right? It should just be about democracy and the foundations of democracy, and yet it does become politicized. I mean, if you look at any voting regulation laws ever, I mean, they're racially decided, they're economically decided on all these different categorizations. So it feels like beautiful to have it not be on an issue area, but I think it does end up potentially becoming on an issue area because certain, it will be politicized in some capacity. And that's definitely what we work in areas that are, right, in Burundi, the government's practically falling apart right now. And they're very threatened by people coming together because that's seen as a direct threat to the government. So, it might seem not like an issue area to us, but
Chicago, Illinois.
Exactly. So that's the reason I was bringing it up. But I agree in principle, but in practice, it feels like we've got to address that at some point.
And that's one of the major challenges for this field too, is because greater participation and engagement means taking power away in some capacity. And so, taking power away in some capacity.
That's how we conceive it. It actually could be deriving greater power, but we perceive it
that's the
incorrectly.
argument. The initial default position is you're taking power away.
Yes.
Yeah. In New Democracy, we actually think it can be done in a way that it's not about taking power away.
Do you frame it in a power conversation at all when you talk about not taking power away? When you talk about deliberative practices with the folks that you work with?
We don't talk about taking power away.
Right. How do you frame it then? It's about empowering them. Do you use empowerment or affirmative?
It's about making much better decisions in a
Right.
process that's where you have participation by a much more representative group,
Right.
Informed, deliberative, prioritizing solving the problem over one side beating another side, and also not manipulated,
And then,
not stacked against any one side.
and I think it's the other aspect of it. So we've done work in background with elected officials at various stages, and then individuals and organizations who've done work in association or partnership with elected officials at local, state, and federal government here in the U.S. And I think it's really important to keep in mind, and this is where I said what you're actually trying to accomplish dictates the terms of what questions you ask and what you're actually trying to provide. And so when we're talking with someone who is a member of Congress in the U.S., our conversation with them is not going to be necessarily about how do we make this decision on your behalf, because that's essentially, it's a non-starter at this point. There's just not the level of capacity for us or anyone else to do the work that would do it. But what's useful to learn is what information would be valuable to them in making decisions on behalf of their constituents that they aren't able to get through the means that they currently have available. That's different than a local government official who wants better insight into, or to provide an opportunity because they have it within their scope and within their power to actually change the way that they govern, or their council or whatever they might be doing actually implements on behalf of or through the kind of advisement of a group. And it's where having an understanding and taking the time to effectively scope and manage what you're trying to do and how it's presented to whom is a really important element of what you, because it's just not useful to go to Congress and say, hey, we're going to do this for you, because we don't have $1 million to make this one tiny little thing. So that's part of what we'll maybe walk through a little bit more in our design conversation, and then lead into the CIR in particular, because that's solving a particular problem that is felt both from constituents as well as policymakers in a state, and it's a unique way to address those problems simultaneously, so it's not a zero-sum power dynamic that emerged. So we are at time that we did want to reconvene from our break in our original schedule. So I'm just going to ask, we can put the video on if we'd like. It's about 15 minutes long, and start the break it that way. And if you need to get up or want to get up during, that might be one way to just kind of keep us on track. Is everyone good with that?
So the video would be the break?
Yes, and we'll take a little bit afterwards as well. But just get it going. Feel free to take it and get up if you want, and then we'll take a couple minutes afterwards and then reconvene for